The benthic zone is the ecological region at the lowest level of a body of water, such as an ocean or a lake, including the sediment surface and some subsurface layers. Organisms living in this zone are called benthos. The organisms generally live in close relationship with the substrate bottom, and many are permanently attached to the bottom. The superficial layer of the soil lining the given body of water, the benthic boundary layer, is an integral part of the benthic zone, as it greatly influences the biological activity which takes place there. Examples of contact soil layers include sand bottoms, rocky outcrops, coral, and bay mud. The benthic region of the ocean begins at the shoreline, the intertidal or littoral zone, and extends downward along the surface of the continental shelf out to sea. The continental shelf is a gently sloping benthic region that extends away from the landmass. At the continental shelf edge, usually about 200 meters deep, the gradient greatly increases and is known as the continental slope. The continental slope drops down to the deep sea floor. The deep sea floor is called the abyssal plain and usually is about 4,000 meters deep. The ocean floor is not all flat, but has submarine ridges and deep ocean trenches known as the hadal zone, which comprise much of the benthic zone. The benthic zone and its topography and composition are integral to the ecosystem it maintains. It comprises the bottom, such as the ocean floor or the bottom of a lake, the sediment surface, and some subsurface layers. The adjective benthic refers to something connected with or occurring on the bottom of a body of water. The benthic zone refers to both freshwater, brackish, and saltwater environments. Depending on the water body, the benthic zone may include areas that are only a few inches below the water, such as a stream or shallow pond, or maybe at the bottom of an ocean below a 4,000 meter or 13,000 foot column of water. The bottoms deeper than the abyssal zone occupies the sparsely inhabited hadal zone, with the name derived from Hades, the classical Greek underworld. The bottom areas lying at lesser depths than the abyssal zone occupy the bathyal zone. These three zones belong to the deep sea realm. The hadal, abyssal, and bathyal zones are in such relatively deep, high-pressure areas of the ocean that they and their organisms are difficult to observe and map. The deep trenches or fissures that plunge down thousands of feet below the ocean floor, such as the Mariana Trench in the Pacific, are almost unexplored. Few scientific vessels have been able to descend to these depths. Modern seafloor mapping technology have released linkages between seafloor geomorphology and benthic habitats, in which groups of benthic communities are associated with specific geomorphic settings. Examples include cold-water coral communities associated with seamounts and submarine canyons, kelp forests associated with inner shelf rocks and reefs, and rockfish associated with the rocky escarpments on continental slopes. In these oceanic environments, the lower zones of benthic habitats are in deep, pressurized areas of the ocean. As a result of this geographic isolation, many benthic organisms have retained their historic evolutionary characteristics. Some organisms are slightly larger than their relatives living in the shallower zones, largely because of higher oxygen concentration in deep water. It is not easy to map or observe these organisms in their habitats, and most modern observations are made using remotely operated underwater vehicles, known as ROVs, and rarely submarines. Benthos are the organisms which live in the benthic zone and are different from those elsewhere in the water column. Many are adapted to live on the substrate or bottom of the ocean. In their habitats, they can be considered as dominant creatures, but are often a source of prey for larger organisms such as the lemon shark. Many organisms adapted to deep water pressure cannot survive in the upper parts of the water column. The pressure difference can be very significant, approximately 1 atmosphere for each 10 meters of water depth. The term benthos comes from Greek language and means depth of a sea. Benthos is also used in freshwater biology to refer to organisms at the bottom of freshwater bodies of water, such as lakes, rivers, and streams. Benthic organisms can be divided into two categories based on whether they make their home on the ocean floor or an inch or two into the ocean floor. Those living on the surface of the ocean floor are known as epifauna. Those who live burrowed into the ocean floor are known as infauna. The zone is also inhabited by some extremophiles like the piezophile, which can survive in very high pressures. Macrobenthos comprises of a larger, more visible benthic organisms that are greater than 1 millimeter in size. Some examples are polychaete worms, bivalves, echinoderms, sea anemones, corals, sponges, and others. Miobenthos comprises of tiny benthic organisms that are less than 1 millimeter, but greater than 0.1 millimeter in size. Some examples are nematodes, water bears, gastroarches, and smaller crustaceans such as copepods. Microbenthos comprises of microscopic benthic organisms that are less than 0.1 millimeter in size. These include bacteria, diatoms, ciliates, amoeba, and flagellates. Sources of food for benthic communities can derive from the water column above these habitats in the form of aggregations of detritus, inorganic matter, and living organisms. These aggregations are commonly referred to as marine snow and are important for the deposition of organic matter and bacterial communities. The amount of material sinking to the ocean floor can average 307,000 aggregates per meter squared per day. The amount will vary based on the depth of the benthos, as benthos in a shallow region will have more available food than the benthos in the deep sea. Because of their reliance on it, microbes may become spatially dependent on detritus in the benthic zone. The microbes found in the benthic zone, specifically dinoflagellates and foraminifera, colonize rapidly on detritus matter while forming a symbiotic relationship with each other. Benthic macroinvertebrates have important ecological functions, such as regulating the flow of materials and energy in river ecosystems through their food web linkages. Because of this correlation between the flow of energy and nutrients, benthic macroinvertebrates have the ability to influence food resources on fish and other organisms in aquatic ecosystems. The presence of macroinvertebrates such as amphipoda also affect the dominance of certain types of algae in benthic ecosystems as well. In addition, because benthic zones are influenced by the flow of dead organic material, there have been studies conducted on the relationship between stream and river water flows and the resulting effects on the benthic zone. Low flow events show a restriction in nutrient transport from benthic substrates to food webs and cause a decrease in benthic macroinvertebrate biomass, which leads to the disappearance of food sources in the substrate. The general ecosystem that exists within the benthic zone is one of the most varied and unique on the planet. Benthic habitats are very diverse, depending upon their depth and location, and have distinct biological, physical, and geochemical characteristics. The superficial layer of the soil lining in the given body of water is an integral part of the benthic zone, as it influences greatly the biological activity that takes place there. Examples of contact soil layers include sand bottoms, rock outcrops, coral, and bay mud. Depending on the water body, the benthic zone may include areas which are only a few inches below the water, such as a stream or shallow pond. The other end of the spectrum, benthos of a deep ocean, includes the bottom levels of the oceanic abyssal zone. The abyssal zone of the benthic zone, from 2,000 to 6,000 meters in depth, remains in perpetual darkness and never receives daylight. It contains the very deep benthic communities near the bottom of oceans. The abyssal zone has temperatures generally around 0 to 3 degrees Celsius, but reaches up to 13 to 15 degrees Celsius in some areas. Because light does not penetrate very deep into ocean water, the energy source for benthic ecosystems is often organic matter from higher up in the water column, which drifts down to the depths, as discussed previously. This dead and decaying matter sustains the benthic food chain. Most organisms in the benthic zone are scavengers or detritivores. Some microorganisms use chemiosynthesis to produce biomass. Because the benthic system regulates energy in aquatic ecosystems, studies have been made of the mechanisms of the benthic zone in order to better understand the ecosystem. Benthic diatoms have been used by the Water Framework Directive, known as the WFD, to establish ecological quality ratios that determine the ecological status of lakes and nations around the world. Research is being made on benthic assemblages to see if they can be used as indicators of healthy aquatic ecosystems. Benthic assemblages in urbanized coastal regions are not functionally equivalent to benthic assemblages in untouched regions. Additionally, the benthic zone provides many valuable products and ecological services. Benthic organisms play an important role in food chains, including as food for humans, and some play a critical role in the breakdown of organic matter. Some benthic zones, such as areas of coral reefs, kelp forests, and eelgrass beds, help to buffer wave action along the coastlines, providing storm protection. Human impacts to the benthic zone have occurred at all ocean depths, but are most significant on shallow continental shelf and slope habitats. The benthic zone provides an area for spawning, foraging, and refuge for various fish species, and benthic habitats function in nutrient cycling and the removal of contaminants from the water by such filter feeders as scallops, mussels, and others, of pollutants, organic matter, and sediments. In conclusion, the benthic zone is one of the most ecologically and geographically varied environments in the world. Many of its inhabitants form the basis of aquatic food chains and serve to clean and sustain the habitat that they reside in. Without this vital and massive ecosystem, we would not have the rivers, lakes, and oceans as we know them today. The diversity of these habitats and their organisms also add to the delight and mystery of nature for humans, whether it is through the beauty of a coral reef, the observation of a sea anemone on the ocean floor, or of a sighting of a new creature in the exploration of a deep ocean habitat.